So first, I want to thank the Medieval Institute, Tom Berman, of course, and Mohamad for giving me this opportunity to be here, not just for this colloquium, which is great to be here, but also to do some research, which is something that once we are advancing in our careers, we seldom have time to do. And it's been wonderful to enjoy this library. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I had to do a long trip, but it's absolutely been worth it. And starting with today's work, I think my role here would be also not just to talk about Mohamad's book, but to set the struggle he's been through in the projects and the research that has been taking place in Spain and in general about Granada in the last years. So that's what I will try to do, and I hope I will convey more or less why I think this book or these books or this book and articles would be important in what we are doing about Granada nowadays. So courtly life in the 14th century Granada and the community of intellectuals therein has received less attention than it deserves, definitely. Scholar officials as a cultural product of that environment still need a great monograph. Maybe we have it. And there are also important gaps and misunderstandings in the interpretation of dynastic history, which are being solved in the last years. For instance, you wouldn't believe it, but the family tree of the Nasrid sultans was only delineated in 2000, so yesterday. And the collateral lines and wives of the sultans are still being disentangled. I think there are few dynasties that are so little known in Islamic history. It is one of the most attractive fields of the late medieval history in the Iberian Peninsula, and it has been thriving since it has become an object of local history, so to say, on the one side, and the focus of 4 competing departments and institutions: the Arabic and History departments in Granada, the Escuela de Estudios Árabes of the CSIC in Granada, and the Central CSIC, Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas in Madrid. These 4 institutions are all working on Granada. There is a double aim in this book, which speaks to the different approaches that Granada has suffered over the years. On the one hand, Granada has become a kind of national enterprise or corporation, studied as a rarity vis-a-vis other Islamic polities, with a strong component of Castilian frontier law. This has been questioned recently with approaches that seek to set Granada in the Mediterranean context and in relation with Aragon rather than Castile. But there is still a long way to go, to which this book is an important part. Moreover, Granada has been seen as a strange derivation of classical Islam embodied by Al-Andalus and in conflict with the Almohad Caliphate. Recent research has also shown that this is not so necessarily, and networks with the Mamluk and Ottomans still need to be stressed. So here is where we are, more or less, for those of you who are not familiar. And Mohamad Ballan's work shows a number of questions that need attention for the 14th century, precisely. One of them is the space of the secretaries and administration in the city of Granada. Although the Alhambra is the most outstanding of the palaces in the city nowadays, it was not always so. And the version of the Alhambra that we are now shown is Washington Irving's Alhambra. It's not the Nasrid Alhambra. So here we have a problem from the start. The Alhambra, as Mohamad has shown, was first a fortress, ill-prepared to host the crowds of secretaries that would later walk the palace. The city where the civil servants were hosted was probably built by Mohamad III at the time, 1309, when the Puerta del Vino was connecting this part of the city with the fortress was built. The Meshwar, as we know it today, was a late addition, probably around the reign of Ismail I, who undertook important works in the palace around 1314 to 1325. The Comares Halls and the Palace of the Lions were built by Mohamad V, during Ibn al-Khatib's lifetime, and even after his demise and death, if we accept the theory of Juan Carlos Ruiz Souza that they would have been used as library, madrasa, and even funerary kuba. At the time of Ibn al-Khatib's youth, therefore, the question of how the court moved from one palace to the other and where the administration was placed in the Alcazaba Kadima or in the Alhambra has not yet been solved. Here you have a number of the places where the old kind of administrative offices of the Nasrids could have been placed. We don't know where the secretaries lived. We don't know if they had a special quarter in the city or where their children were trained. What we know is that the Alcazaba Kadima was the center of the administration before the Alhambra turned from fortress to palace. And the Dar al-Qurra, which was a part of the Sirid palace, became used by the Nasrids, and then later on became the house of several of the wives of the kings. Okay, so all these spaces. We also have the Cuarto Real de Comares, the Santo Domingo, which was built by Mohamad II in another completely different part of the city. So we have all these spaces of the court, and we don't know how they related to each other, and we don't know where the administration was placed. So we need more about this for sure. To this, we have to add the role of the secretaries that worked and followed the other members of the royal family, precisely because the other members didn't live in the Alhambra necessarily. The ladies of the household, those who ruled their properties. We also need to know how does the administration realign when the different branches of the Nasrid family succeed in the throne. And all these questions can only be answered if we know about the secretary officials. There is another important underlying question in all the book, which is the relationship between the Marinid dynasty and in nowadays Morocco and the Nasrid dynasty. It should be remembered that the Marinids had important strongholds in the Iberian Peninsula, in the areas of Ronda, Marbella, and Malaga, and in Gibraltar, being also in charge of the main appointment of the army, the commander of the Mujahideen. This gave them immense power in the royal court, but the dialectic in the caliphal titles, the dynastic titles that Mohamad was showing us before, between the two families, arises as one of the main points in the last chapter of this book. And I think it is vital for the relationship between North Africa and Granada. Who is first in which, and who is copying which, and how is this developing? You have Ibn al-Khatib on one side, Ibn Khaldun on the other side, and how this interacts is vital to the knowledge of the Nasrid dynasty and its whereabouts. We also need to know more about the impact of the hostage policy, because these hostages are real cultural brokers. They are crucial to the transmission of cultural influences. And we have them from the Marinid court, we have them from the Castilian court, Aragonese court, Granadan court, and they are moving everywhere. So these hostages need to be studied also alongside the secretaries, who themselves sometimes, as we have seen, were also cultural brokers. There are other questions that are interesting to address. And I think the role of secretaries here is also very important. One of the context points that needs to be discussed is the configuration of vassalage vis-a-vis Castile. I think one of the main points that we need to take into account, and which I have researched before, is that Granada is a vassal kingdom of Castile only temporarily. A contract of vassalage in this time means that it's held only during the life periods of the people who signed it. This means that every time either the King of Castile or the Emir of Granada died, the contract was rendered invalid. This is very important to understand that Granada was never a vassal kingdom. The King of Granada or the Emir of Granada or whatever you want to call him, he is the vassal king of the Castilian king. But that is an immense gap, an immense difference. We are not dealing with a vassal kingdom, we are dealing with a vassal person who can convey the strength of the kingdom to war, but who doesn't necessarily represent the whole kingdom in a way. But there are also other implications that go with the signing of the treaties. For instance, it was signed under the subterfuge of a truce. So according to Islamic law, it had 3 years value, and we can see it consistently in many of the truces. Sometimes it gets extended to the 4th year, but it's still valid under Islamic law. And only a very few times it gets signed for 10 years, and this is an exception. It needs to be renovated. It needs to be renegotiated. So it's a subterfuge, really. It is a peace treaty, if you want, or it's a treaty of vassalage, but it is also a truce. And in this respect, it can be accepted as a tool by Muslims, a tool that in a way legitimizes holy war immediately afterwards. So here we have a lot of nuances that help to explain the play, the political play of these kings and of the viziers, of course. But it can also be masked under a truce agreement with another kingdom. And here we have commercial alignments, truces that mean some kind of economical counterpart, whatever. And also dealing in triangle between Castile, Aragon, and Granada, and even the Marines sometimes. So the political game is high, and we shouldn't see things as like the usual kind of fight between Castile and Granada that we are sometimes presented in kind of general works. This is very nuanced, it has a lot of implications, and it can be played in many ways. And only the emirs of Granada who feel weak will sign a vassalage treaty with Castile. This means that in the 13th century, we only have Mohamad I. In the 14th century, we only have Mohamad III and Nasser with Fernando IV, and then Mohamad V with Pedro I. And these are short treaties. And then in the 15th century, we have sometimes a treaty by Mohamad IX, who was very unstable emir because he had 4 different periods of reign. But then the only people who signed vassalage to Castile in the 15th century are the emirs who are supported by Castilian troops. And all of them come from collateral branches of the family, not the central one. So only if you are in a weak position, and if you need troops, you're going to sign a vassalage contract with Castile, not the kingdom, just the kings and the weak kings. It's not the same. Another of the interesting points that Mohamad Ballan's book raises is the question of the emblems taken from the Christians that the works of the secretaries kind of disregard as valid. Here we have one of the main distinctive emblems that we find in the Alhambra. This time it's the Alhambra, which is the Order of the Band. There's been a lot of writings about this. Torres Valdás already wrote about it. There's been a number of articles after that. The first thing that is relevant here is to discuss why a coat of arms. I was asking all my colleagues around, and everybody told me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not my field exactly, but there are no coats of arms in Islam. As such, there are banners, there are a number of emblems, but a shield, this is strange. So what, again, understanding Granada from the Iberian corporate point of view, they will all say this comes from the Christians. It's the Christian king who gives this coat of arms to the Nasrid king. Fine, when they sign vassalage, but as we have seen, this is already questioned. Here we find the evolution of the Christian and Muslim coats of arms. The first one is the one you can see on the top. That is Alfonso XI, the creator of the Order of the Band, the first chivalric order, monarchic chivalric order in Europe. He has that black band over white. Okay, this is in the chamber that he builds for himself in the royal castle Alcázar of Cordoba in the 1330s, more or less. And that's the ceiling of the royal chamber. So very kind of central to monarchic power definition. With false, well, it's not false. They have read the letters in Arabic, but they are kind of strange. What the usual traditional history says is that this coat of arms is given to Mohammed V when he signs his vassalage to Pedro I, and therefore becomes the second coat of arms, the one with the Alhambra, let's say, motto, La Ali but this, we start see it changes colors, it changes things, and has the inscription in the middle. So it becomes somehow Arabicized, if you want. Now, the debate is it really given by Pedro I to Muhammad V? Would Muhammad V kind of promote this image in the Alhambra for himself? I think when Mohammed Ballan is studying like the ways of promoting legitimacy and the dynasty for the Granadan public, not for the Christian public, we have seen that the Atlas Catalan doesn't have that coat of arms at all. So this is something inside Granada. They are promoting this, but to whom? And who would accept a coat of arms in the Christian way, in the Islamic court of Granada? That's interesting. And then we have another moment when the order of the band becomes crucial to the relations between Granada and Castile, which is when Yusuf IV Ibn al-Maul, that is someone who comes from a collateral branch, signs a vassalage treaties with Juan II, John II of Castile, to get troops. This is clearly to get troops to get to Granada. And it says in the Chronicle of the Falconer, which is one of the sources, it says that the king of Castile gave him a banner where he had the device of the band. The device of the band, or the insignia of the band, is a later development of the same chivalric order, which takes place in the 15th century. Okay, but it's completely kind of reshaped from the Christian point of view, and the emblem changes and becomes this red coat of arms with the two dragons hanging the band. Okay, so this would be what John II would give Yusuf IV. So it has nothing to do with the coat of arms that appears in the Alhambra. So we are playing with completely different shades of chivalric, propaganda. And it's difficult to kind of see what cross-cultural influences can kind of give this ideological profile of the emirs of Granada. There's one thing that Mohammed will greatly enjoy, is that this last vassalage contract was signed and the ceremony took place upon the conquest of Loja, the born place of Ibn al-Khatib, in 1431. So it's also related somehow to Ibn al-Khatib, but in a different way. Then the last chapter of Mohammed Ballan's work is devoted to dynastic issues and the frontier. And here I have a problem, although he deals with the role of Christian women as mothers of the sultans, very much as in the Umayyad Cordoba, and the importance of this choice for the depiction of an Arab ancestry and ethnic purity symbolized by physical traits. The role of Nasrid women in dynastic succession has not been considered. This can be better seen in the 15th century because we have more records, but already during Ibn al-Khatib's lifetime, some of these Nasrid ladies were very prominent. Endogamy was widely practiced since the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba. Marrying into the family guaranteed parity, which in Granada was very important. And dynastic links occur in almost every generation of the Nasrid house, but even more so at the beginning of the 15th century, end of the 14th century. Emirs often married the daughters of other emirs from the different branches of the family. For instance, Muhammad VI it was the husband of Yusuf I's daughter, and he tried to remove his brother-in-law, Mohamad V, from the throne. So they are using like the mother's lineage in a way to justify removing someone from the throne. Nasrid wives took an active part in the fight for power, funding and counseling their sons and relatives. And the influence of these Nasrid princesses came from their origin, their blood, their fortune, and from their role as regents during minorities. And we know them, and their active role needs to be studied. The best known of them correspond precisely to the 14th century, and they are included in Ibn al-Khatib's famous histories of the Nasrids and the Kitab al-Alam and the Hatta and other essays on government or health. So I think we really need to bring these women forward and put them in their role in the court, and also their secretaries and the people who work. Like, we need to see if their administration became part of the career of these secretaries and how they went up the ladder, maybe using this female power, because I'm sure we would be surprised. As I want to leave time for discussion, I will stop here. I think Mohamad Ballan's work interacts with a number of possible publics and academic communities, scholars in the history of the Iberian Peninsula, on the Mediterranean, Islamic history, Arabic. It will be difficult, I'm sure, to please all of them, but I think his contribution will definitely be relevant to the history of Nasrid Granada, which is what he wants. And I can't wait to see it. Thank you very much.